Dolphin fans, I'm Connor from the Dolphins Dive, and in today's video, I'm going to be going over free agent targets for the Miami Dolphins. Now, in my last video, I went over all of the holes on this Miami Dolphins roster, which was unfortunately a plethora, but hopefully the Dolphins in free agency, which starts in less than a week, can address some of these holes so they can head into the draft and really emphasize the best player available mentality, which, to give props to Chris Greer, which I know Dolphins fans don't like to do, that's pretty much has always been his approach. You think about us drafting Chop Robinson, it wasn't necessarily the biggest need, and we still went out and took him, and he appears to be an ascending stud. So, nonetheless, I'm going to hop into free agent targets, starting with the backup quarterback position. Now, there's actually a decent bit of options. The Dolphins can go many different routes, from established kind of veteran backup to a young guy. I like to kind of compare it similarly to, I guess, Sam Darnold in Minnesota. Somebody that's young, that's kind of been written off. So there's different variations is what I'm getting at. My top target would be QB Marcus Mariota. Obviously, you have the Hawaiian connection between him and Tua. I think, obviously, skill sets are slightly different. He obviously doesn't have the skills to the degree of Tua, but I think he can operate the system to a point where we aren't going to be as bad as we've been with our previous backup quarterbacks. Next one is kind of what I was referring to, the high upside guy, and that's Zach Wilson. Obviously, just was under Sean Payton, which is obviously a good offensive coach. And he's a guy where, say Tua goes down, he might be bad, but he also could then put himself in the position to like taking a job because there's so much talent there. But obviously, he's always needed to be developed, and who knows how far along he has come. And then last on this list, I had to put him just because he's my dog, Jameis Winston.
Let's go. That's a W.
He's a guy where he's going to come in, he's not going to be afraid to throw the ball. And that was something I saw early on with Tyler Huntley, where he was kind of trigger shy. Jameis Winston won't be. He'll let it fly. And for the best of the worst, it'll be entertaining football. And sign me up for that if Tua does go down, because for the Dolphins, it's been pretty boring without Tua. In terms of the receiver position, obviously this is not a big need for the Miami Dolphins. We have our two guys in Tyreek and Jalen Waddle, although I've been in favor of trading Tyreek. I just don't expect that to happen. So I'm not approaching this offseason as if it will. So I'm more so talking about a wide receiver 3 guy, or at least somebody competing for a roster spot, because the Dolphins could feel pretty confident in Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and Malik Washington, although I will say they need some kind of variation, because all 3 of those guys are smaller guys. Like, why can't we have like a 6'2", 210-pound guy? Like, they always talk about how important blocking is for the receivers, and yet get the smallest guys on the field at that position. So some guys on this list, they all have a pretty similar frame, starting with Lil Jordan Humphrey. He's a big body receiver, was, I believe, on the Saints, and then on the Broncos under Sean Payton. Bigger dude. I think he's exactly what I'm looking for. Bigger body, will help in the run game, do the dirty work. Next guy on this list, former Miami Dolphins, who probably had the best year of his career, Matt Collins. I was frustrated when we let him go to begin with, and I'd be all for bringing him back. I don't think there's beef between him and the organization, but just a name. Another former Miami Dolphin, along the same lines, Trent Sherfield. Similar, who went to Buffalo as well, but bigger body, good at blocking. Like, that's all I care about. We have the talent at the receiver position. I'm looking for guys that are going to block, are bigger bodies in the passing game. Josh Palmer, similar build. He's more of a pricey upside guy than the rest of this list. I believe he's like 25, 26. He's had some production, but he's 6'1", 210, so still a bigger frame. And then last on this list, and I can't take credit for this, this goes all to Kyle Krabs, who's been doing his offseason breakdown. Ben Skoranek, who was formerly on the Rams and then the Texans, and then the Steelers. He's played tight end, fullback. They move him around. He's a big body, dog in the run game. Like, once again, that kind of fits what I'd like to see the Dolphins do. In terms of the tight end position, now, this isn't for me to come at people for their ball knowledge, but if you don't think we have a hole at tight end because we have Jonnu, you just aren't fully aware of the tight end position and what's asked of them. So Jonnu Smith is a great tight end in terms of being a receiver, but the Dolphins ask a lot from their tight ends in the run game as well, and Jonnu isn't that caliber of blocker. And just Julian Hill, I think, got too much flack from the fan base. But with that said, I do think the Dolphins need better play from that position. So I think they should look to improve that position, although free agency isn't very good. A name I have on this list is Irv Smith. Tommy Tremble is also an option. I just don't know if I want to give up too much money, especially with how good this draft class is. But I would like to see the Dolphins address this position, ideally in the draft. In terms of the offensive line, everybody's favorite position to talk about. First and foremost, let's talk about swing tackles, because I think the Dolphins feel pretty confident with their tackle position. They have Patrick Paul, Austin Jackson, and potentially Teron Armstead, although I'm expecting him to retire. The Dolphins said they're approaching this offseason as if he's going to. They also have Keon Smith, who tore his ACL in last preseason, but was appearing to be a very quality depth player, and I think you can kind of assume that as well. So I think the Dolphins have 3 tackles, 2 starting, 1 depth guy. So I think they need 1 swing tackle to help ensure this offensive line doesn't crumble, because as we've noticed, when the tackle play goes down is really when this offensive line really takes a tumble, because the offensive line was pretty good until Austin Jackson went down with injury, and then Teron Armstead was having his injuries, and then against the Texans in a must-win game, we're starting Jackson Carman at right tackle. That's where it really broke down. Yes, the interior was not good enough, but when it became a true problem where we couldn't do anything is when the tackle play went down. I have 2 names on this list. Joe Noteboom of the Rams. He's got position versatility. He got a big contract, but he's not going to be brought back. He's kind of regressed a little bit. So depending on his price tag, if he's getting anything near starter money in like the $8 to $10 million a year range, I don't think that makes sense. And then last on this list, Andre Dillard. Was a high draft pick. He's bounced around some places, but most recently with the Packers, which is run a similar scheme. And he's still young, and that's kind of why I've paired him with the Miami Dolphins, especially if we're talking about a swing backup guy. In terms of the guard position, which is where the Dolphins truly need to emphasize, because they have 2 holes at starting level positions. Good news for the Dolphins is not only is guard not a premium position, so they don't get paid nearly as much as tackles or most other positions. The other thing is this is a great free agent crop. Like, I have a bunch of names on this list, so the Dolphins really will have their pick of what they want to do. So starting on this list, this one's kind of, I don't think it's going to happen, but if the Dolphins want to kind of sign a vet that they'd feel confident in, is not a long-term solution. Brandon Scherf got released from the Jaguars. His best plays behind him, but he's still a quality player. Mekhi Becton, coming off the best year of his career under the Eagles. He isn't necessarily a perfect scheme fit, but I think it's the kind of transition I'd like the Dolphins to make. You kind of saw it with Sean McVay. They ran a similar offense to us, and then they kind of went really big on their interior offensive line to help run in between the tackles, and that would be a good move, getting Mekhi Becton, who's still pretty athletic for his size, and especially having a smaller center in Aaron Brewer. I think I heard Jason Kelce talk about this, is like, I always felt better when I had a bigger guy next to me, because if you have like a 290-pound center and then you have like a 300-pound guard, like, you're just undersized compared to a lot of these guys you're going up against. So if you have Mekhi Becton, who's a mountain, definitely helps improve the power inside running game, which I think something the Dolphins need to improve on. Next on this list is a perfect scheme fit in Aaron Banks on the 49ers his entire career. He's a bit bigger as well. So Aaron Banks makes the most sense in terms of projecting scheme fit, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's a Miami Dolphin next week. James Daniel. This is a kind of cheap shot in the dark guy. This is a very Miami Dolphins signing, as he's got a robust injury history. He's coming off a torn Achilles. He is a perfect scheme fit, but the injury stuff, I'd stay away personally, unless you can sign him very cheap and he's kind of a guy that you aren't anticipating even having to start, but is in competition for a job. Patrick McCarry, the Baltimore Ravens. He's got some positional versatility, and we know how the Baltimore Ravens play football. They're going to be tough guys that can push people around. Next on this list is Tevin Jenkins, a highly touted prospect coming out, had some injuries, was on a bad offensive line, bounced between tackle and guard, but still has very good upside. He's a very powerful guy. He's athletic. The injuries are slightly concerning, but he's a guy that's on the younger side that you could give him a 3-year contract and he could be under contract after you extend him. Like, he's a guy that could be a long-term solution at the position, but obviously there's a lot of question marks. Will Fries of the Indianapolis Colts. He was a 7th-round pick, developed, and would be a good fit for this scheme. Can push people as well, so Will Fries would be a good solution. He's going to be a little pricey. He's coming off a broken leg, though. And then Evan Brown for the Arizona Cardinals. He's a guy that I like, once again, similar to what I mentioned with James Daniel, where you bring him in and you feel okay having to start him, but at worst, he's a backup guard that is competing for a starting job and can do it at a pretty solid level. Now onto the defensive side of the football, where the Dolphins have even more holes, starting on the defensive line. Now, the Dolphins can plug some of these holes by bringing back some of their own in Deshaun Hand and Benito Jones. But until they do, the Dolphins have a hole at nose tackle and a starting level defensive tackle, as well as rotational. Good thing is, it's a good draft class, but the Dolphins will need to address this position in free agency without a doubt. Starting on the top of this list, B.J. Hill. He's been a pretty quality player throughout his entire career, going from the Giants to the Bengals. He'd be a pretty good 3 technique to pair up with Zach Sealer. You'd feel pretty confident as those two as your main duo. Milton Williams, which I think this is more of a shot in the dark. I don't think the Dolphins will dish out the kind of cash for Milton, but obviously for the Eagles, became a very good player for them. Bobby Brown of the Los Angeles Rams. Once again, I'm going to give credit to Kyle Krabs on this one. He made the call here, and it basically fits our needs in terms of what we're looking for in a 3-tech. He's got some nasty to him, some dog, and he's young with some room to grow. Sebastian Joseph Day, he's a guy that's bounced around the league, but once again, a quality 3-tech. And then last on this list, I don't know how much money he's going to get, because he might not even be in the conversation, but if he's not out of the ballpark, DJ Jones of the Broncos, he's a very good nose tackle. So if the Dolphins want to get some upside at the position, they can go out and sign DJ Jones. On to the linebacker position, which there's a decent bit of names here. I don't know how much money the Dolphins are going to want to spend, but the linebacker market isn't that expensive, as we saw where we got damn near all-pro play from a pretty cheap free agent in Jordan Brooks. You have Dre Greenlaw, who kind of similar position as Jordan Brooks, went through some injuries. I forget if he got hurt at the end of last year. Obviously got the Achilles in the Super Bowl. He's a very good player, but there's injury concerns. But there was with Jordan Brooks, and that worked out. So there's risk and reward. Nick Bolton of the Kansas City Chiefs, absolute beast. I expect him to get a big contract that wouldn't be with the Miami Dolphins, but shoot, sign me up for him. That's a guy that can do everything. Run, hit, and cover. He's a bigger body dude with championship caliber all over him. I'm all for that. Next on this list, also a former Kansas City Chief and Willie Gay. I would say he's kind of a mini version of Nick Bolton. Not as good, but still a quality player. Ernest Jones, who formerly with the Rams, got traded to the Titans and then got traded to the Seahawks. Seahawks also run the same scheme as us, and he had a lot of success with the Seahawks. It's why they let go of Terrell Dodson, in which we signed. So Ernest Jones would be a very good scheme fit. He's a very good blitzer, so I think he'd be a good fit. I once again, I just don't see it happening. I see him getting a lot more money somewhere else, if not being brought back in Seattle. Last on this list is Jamien Sherwood of the New York Jets. We saw him twice last year. He converted from safety to linebacker and was doing a pretty good job of closing some of those throwing windows. Obviously, being a former safety, he's got some athleticism to him, but still some bite. I saw him be very aggressive towards the football in his games against the Miami Dolphins. Next, on to the safety position. Once again, similar to how I mentioned with the linebackers, is not a premium position. You can get quality players for not that expensive, and similar to the guard market, there's a lot of good safeties available. I'm going to go through some of the guys I could see the Dolphins going after. And Talona Hufanga, former San Francisco 49er. Trayvon Moehrig of the Raiders, who everybody I've talked to has basically come to the consensus they prefer Moehrig over Holland, yet all the numbers are projecting Holland to make more. So if Moehrig is in the Holland money range, I don't see the Dolphins wanting to dish out that kind of money. However, if he's a discounted version in the $12 million range, absolutely sign me up for Trayvon Moehrig. Jeremy Chin of the Washington Commanders. He's an ascending player that's continued to get better and was an absolute dog for that Commanders defense. I was a big fan of him coming out, and I would like for him to be a Miami Dolphin. Andre Sisco, I would like if they signed him with the intent of being a depth player competing for a starting job, because he's had some ups and downs in Jacksonville, but he's still a young ascending player. So if you sign him, but also he's competing with other players for a starting job, I'm okay with that. And if he wins the job, awesome. But I wouldn't feel comfortable signing him and setting and forgetting at that starting safety spot. Last on this list is Julian Blackmon, who for the Colts been there for a long time. He's coming off like a 1-year, $4 million deal, so that goes to show the kind of price you'd have to pay. And he'd basically feel comfortable with him in the back end of the defense, basically being a cover safety. Last on this list of free agent targets, the final need for the Miami Dolphins is the cornerback position. Now, I mentioned this in my needs video. This is a position where the Dolphins might just be like, hey, we have a lot of young talent. We're just going to let them have an absolute bloodbath, and whoever wins the battle comes out on top. That obviously leaves you susceptible to not having enough talent there. But it's something I can see the Dolphins doing. It's kind of something you see the Ravens do, which the Dolphins on the defensive side of the ball are coming from, where like they just let their young guys battle it out. And I feel like the Dolphins haven't had that in a minute, where you have lack of certainty at a position and they just let the young guys battle it out. They usually will bring in a veteran guy like Kendall Fuller last year to kind of plug the hole. But the Dolphins have a lot of young talent between like Storm Duck, Ethan Bonner, Cam Smith, even like Jason Matry and some of the other undrafted guys. Like they might just let them battle it out. I would appreciate if they at least brought in some kind of veteran presence. And some of these names include Rasul Douglas, who was most recently with the Buffalo Bills. I don't know what kind of contract he's going to get, so obviously this is all with a grain of salt. Carlton Davis, along those same lines, very good player from the Bucs to the Lions. Who knows how big his contract is? If it's not too big, so be it. Nate Hobbs of the Raiders, he's a slot corner, so I don't know how likely this is. I expect them to continue to keep Cater at the slot position. But if not, Nate Hobbs is a good option. This one made me chuckle. Noah Igbenogany, coming off a tremendous year. Dolphins fans ran him out of town, which rightfully so. He was not good for the Miami Dolphins, but he was a very young player with a lot of like tools to him. And it took a while for him to put it all together. But most recently with Washington, had the best year of his career. And once again, if you're signing him to a cheap deal to compete for a starting job, I don't hate it. Last on this list, Rocky Sin. I'm going to be honest. I don't know how good he's been of late, Rock, but I loved him coming out of college with a wrestling background. I wanted him on the Dolphins then. He's still, I believe, 27. So once again, I'm looking for competition. I don't think they need to get an absolute proving guy at the position. You have Jalen Ramsey. You'll have Kader Kohu. You have a slew of young guys behind that job. So I think, once again, you let them battle out, let the cream rise to the top. But that's it for my free agent targets. The next video will be my mock offseason. Comment your thoughts down below. Which targets do you want to see us sign? Which ones do you disagree with? Any thoughts, sound off in the comments below. Like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, fins up.